Hello, everybody. Welcome back or welcome in if it is your first time here. My name is Beck Griffin, and you are watching or listening to the Deep Dive Project. If this is your first time tuning in and you're wondering what this is the monthly newsroom analysis, which is something that I began doing at the beginning of this year, where I gather in relative news headlines from the past month. We sit down, I read through them, I discuss, and hopefully you guys give me some feedback. In the past, I have treated this as a live stream. I've gone live, and that's been great when I've been able to do that, but I've also done it as a pre-recorded thing that I upload later that is still unscripted and kind of has the same vibe as a live stream, I like to think, just without the live aspect of it. So regardless of whether or not you are tuning in for the premiere or you are listening to this after the fact, I am so happy to have you here. I began this whole endeavor quite some time ago now when I became aware of some human rights issues, let's just say, occurring within a specific Catholic organization called Opus Dei. And I started talking about what I was finding online in the public record, as you will, and I've been at that pretty much ever since. And if you want to learn more about that side, the Opus Dei side of everything, we are going to be talking about it here and there today, along with some other relevant topics. But you can also go and refer to my entire catalog of past episodes that I have published, pretty research and scripted, intensive episodes, as well as the kind of like lighter, more easygoing, sort of like live stream-esque type stuff, like these newsroom analyses. I do a little bit of both, the scripted and the unscripted, so you can kind of pick your poison, choose what works for you, and I appreciate everybody's support who has chosen to hang around. And I hope that if you are a first-time listener, you'll consider subscribing. I know the majority of the people who watch my content are not subscribed, so if you would please consider hitting that subscribe button, follow button, wherever you are listening or watching, I would sincerely appreciate it. If you're tuning in from a podcasting platform, please don't forget to leave a rating or a review because it does help the Deep Dive Project reach more people. Now, all of that boring office stuff out of the way, I feel like I am sort of obligated to say it, but I honestly don't know if it moves the needle in any way, shape, or form. At the end of the day, I think the thing that people are coming here for are the topics that I am focusing on. So we'll not belabor the point anymore and we'll get right to it. I do like to give a few disclaimers before we get in. First of all, everything that I am discussing today is publicly available on the World Wide Web. These are news headlines that were published by a variety of entities, and I will make sure to mention who's publishing and where I'm finding these things. But if for some reason I forget to mention it for a specific article, or you miss it, or you want to share something that I read here or whatever, you can find all of the articles that I'm going to be discussing today linked down below in a source document. Feel free to go to that to reference anything that we discussed today. I am pulling from a variety of news sources from around the world, not just North American or US sites. So that means that sometimes I am dealing with a little bit of a language barrier. I use a web browser translator and it does a pretty good job, but it's not always flawless. I'm also reading some proper nouns that can be a little bit challenging pronunciation wise, and I will always do my best to pronounce everything correctly, to treat everything with the proper respect that I feel that, you know, these issues deserve. But please do not take any mispronunciations from me as a sign of my lack of care or consideration for these issues. You're just hearing me read it aloud for the first time. So, and because it is in a little bit more of a laid back live stream style format, you're hearing it for the first time as it's coming out of my mouth. So I can't guarantee that it's always going to be flawless, but I will do my best. So with all of that said, one final thing I want to make sure to throw in here at the beginning too, just because I feel like it's relevant and I want to continue to emphasize it over and over again. I am not a journalist by trade. I did not go to school for journalism. I do have several degrees, one of which is in English, and I am a very strong writer, and I know how to conduct good research. Don't you worry. I have a science degree. But I am not a journalist. I'm just a member of the public who became aware of some stuff that, because of the fact that I was raised Catholic, felt a little bit closer to home to me, and they were things that I did not at the time see being discussed in the public square in a way that felt really meaningful. Now, luckily, now for a lot of these topics, that is beginning to change in a really substantial and significant way, and that's really, really awesome to see. But I'm just like you. I'm just a member of the public who decided to use the knowledge that I have, the skills that I have, and the resources that I have to bring issues of public concern to the public square through this platform. And that has been my motivation this entire time. I want to inspire people to ask questions, to think critically, to read past headlines, and to be our own best advocates and researchers, because we have the world at our fingertips right now, particularly in the Western world with the internet and technology and everything. And that is a lot of knowledge and a lot of power, and I believe that we need to use it responsibly to educate ourselves, our friends, and our families to try to create a better world for us all to live in. And the Deep Dive Project and what I've been doing is my effort to support that endeavor, my effort to be the change that I want to see. And I do refer to myself as an independent citizen journalist because I do think that what I am doing is journalism, and I treat it with the seriousness that I would hope that any good journalist would treat their work with. But in full disclosure, I want to make sure that I put that out there so that nobody thinks that I'm trying to misrepresent what I am doing or why I am here. I just think that these are important issues that we need to be aware of and we need to be discussing. And like I said, because of the fact that I was raised Catholic, I have an intimate understanding of a lot of these issues and the backdrop against which they are happening, which is Catholicism. And that can be something that can be a little bit niche, and the barrier to entry to discuss some of these topics can be a little bit higher. So I feel like I'm uniquely positioned to be able to kind of discuss these things, and that brings us to why we are here today. So with all that said, I'm going to go ahead and get my first article here pulled up, and we will get right to it. So this first article that we're going to be reading today, this was published November 7th, 2025, from the Regnum Christi Legionaries of Christ website. This is a news publication, news alert that they published. I'm going to switch over to the reader view. The headline reads, "Connecting First Responders with Integrated Faith-Informed Mental Health Care. Father Charles Sikorsky, LC, becomes inaugural member of Hero Council." Now, when I first saw this headline and started reading through this article, my initial knee-jerk reaction was to be positive. In the past, I have spoken positively of efforts that the Legion of Christ seems to be making to provide better care and resources for its priests and members and the lay people that they interact with. And I think given the organization's background, perhaps they could be uniquely positioned to pave the way for a fair, more safe environment in the religious sphere. I think that would be a really, really good thing and would be making lemonade out of some really, really sour lemons, honestly. So my initial reaction to this was positive, but then my feelings kind of changed. And as we read through here, I will explain to you why that is if it is not obvious, but just listen carefully. They say the Hero Council will be focused on delivering real mental health solutions that restore hope to those who serve as first responders by equipping and certifying faith-informed coaches and clinicians, and building partnerships with churches, communities, and mental health professionals. Okay, so far so good. Sounds nice. One of the inaugural members of the Hero Council is Father Charles Sikorsky, LC, who for nearly 20 years has served as president of Divine Mercy University, a graduate school that offers psychology and counseling degrees and integrates current scientific theory with Catholic understanding about the human person. He is joined by other scholars, clinicians, and leaders in behavioral health and faith, including pastors and chaplains, whose job it is to ensure that care and training are evidence-based, ethically grounded, spiritually anchored, and rooted in the pursuit of human flourishing. So they are highlighting this Father Charles Sikorsky, LC, as one of the significant people who's been added to this Hero Council. And note that his chief accomplishment, or at least what they are leading with in the first paragraph, is the fact that he's been president of DMU, a graduate school that has a mental health association and connotation through a Catholic lens. Okay, so president of a university, he's on the Hero Council, and it's committed to this holistic approach to mental health and well-being that combines spiritual insight with rigorous scientific practice, making the initiative a fitting collaboration for Father Charles and DMU, which itself is grounded in an integral Catholic Christian view of the human person, rooted in faith and based in science. Then they have a quote here, and it's this Father Charles talking about over the years here at DMU, how they're on the same page as far as providing faith-based therapy and sending faith-based counselors, of which there is such a shortage, into the world. They talk about the rising rates of depression, suicide, loneliness, and abuse of different kinds, which is certainly true. Says more and more studies over the last 40 to 50 years are showing how integrating faith, religion, spirituality, and prayer is very beneficial to mental health, yet by and large, it can be very difficult to find a counselor who has been trained how to integrate those elements. Now, I would be interested to know where Father Charles got this particular insight from, and I would be interested in reading it in its entirety, because I feel like this is probably not an accurate representation of the entirety of that idea that integrating faith, religion, spirituality, and prayer are very beneficial to mental health. That is true. But my understanding of it, and this is just my understanding as a non-mental health professional, just somebody who's read up quite a bit about mental health, who's definitely spent their fair share of time in a therapist's office. My understanding is that yes, faith, religion, spirituality, prayer, all of those things can be very beneficial if those are things that the person who is going through the therapy is desiring. If those are elements and themes and practices and beliefs that they want to incorporate into and draw on through their therapeutic journey. It's not to say across the board that everyone benefits from integrating faith, religion, spirituality, and prayer into mental health, because that's a gross oversimplification. And like I said, based on my understanding, and by all means, if you know otherwise, please sound off in the comments below and cite your sources. My understanding is that that is not the case. It depends. It depends on the person. Everybody is different. What works for somebody in a therapeutic context is not going to work for someone else. That's why some people have a lot of success with something like EMDR, for example, which is a therapeutic technique for processing like PTSD and that kind of thing. It works great for some people, not so good for others. So I find that wording interesting, but of course, perhaps that's a bit too much nuanced of a take for legionariesofchrist.org. I don't know. And then again, they're emphasizing this need for faith-based mental health care. And then they talk about how there's this 2021 study from the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. The suicide rate of veterans was nearly 60% higher than that of the general population. Members of law enforcement and other first responders have high rates of mental health issues, including stress, anxiety, sleep disorders, family issues, and PTSD. The AACC has been working with the U.S. government and other agencies to provide hope to veterans in active duty military, law enforcement, first responders, and their families. Now, as a United States military veteran myself, I can tell you that that is true. that the rates of suicide in the military and in the veteran population are disproportionately high compared to other people in the same like age ranges. And the same is true for people working in really high stress jobs like first responders. That is absolutely true. There's a whole thing in the military, this like hashtag that you'll see floating around. It comes back up every few years, it seems like, called hashtag 22 and 22 till none, which basically is a reference to the fact that there are 22 service member suicides every single day, I believe is that statistic. And so there's this challenge where people will, for 22 days, they'll do 22 push-ups every single day, and it's to raise awareness for this statistic, which is the disproportionately high suicide rates among military service members. That is true. 100%. I knew people who are no longer here because of suicide. So it's a very, very real issue. I'm not going to soften or couch my language when I talk about it because it's very, very real. It's a threat to people's livelihoods and lives. And it's a very serious issue that needs to be dealt with. And while I do think that the federal government and the U.S. military, Department of Defense, have made some good strides in the right direction, as somebody who was in the military environment, the enlisted environment specifically, and specifically in the Navy within the last 15 years, the military has a long way to go. That's my opinion and my hot take. I believe the Navy, has a long way to go before it's really rounded the corner meaningfully on making some type of a change to these suicide and mental illness statistics for veterans and military members. So anyway, they are talking about that in this article. I think that is important to highlight. They talk about how within this university, DMU, there are several students and alumni with military and law enforcement backgrounds who are bringing their own experiences as first responders to the field of mental health care. So they highlight this DMU alumnus, George Forsyth, whose background as an undercover police officer led him to become a counselor and establish his own psychotherapy practice, specializing in first responder care open to policemen, firefighters, dispatchers, correctional officers, rescue workers, paramedics, and all types of emergency attendants. Now they talk about how George began his career in law enforcement, which is great. He was a member of the DA task force for a while in Baltimore, which is interesting, retired after 25 years. Talks about how he reconnected with his Catholic faith during a time of crisis. Eventually, he obtained a bachelor's degree from Liberty University. Notice I had to scroll for a number of paragraphs before I got to the bit about his credentials. This other important individual who is like coming into this situation with his hero counsel, this George Forsyth. I feel like I had to scroll a long way before I started to read about his credentials. Maybe that's me being nitpicky, but he did get a bachelor's from Liberty University and became a certified alcohol and drug counselor. And it was through that he realized that beneath the addictions lay real mental health struggles that were not necessarily being addressed. And so he became with the new goal of becoming a mental health therapist and a renewed Catholic faith. George went on to obtain a master's degree in counseling at DMU and is now a counselor and the owner of Driftwood Psychotherapy, dedicated to providing specialized in-person and online mental health services to first responders. So this entire article, and it goes on at length a little bit more about both George Forsyth and this Father Charles. You can read it in its entirety. I'm not going to read these last few paragraphs because I just really do not feel like it. And I am certainly not intending to cast aspersions upon George Forsyth's professional background, which from a law enforcement perspective sounds quite robust, or on Father Charles's contributions to DMU as DMU's president. I'm sure that both of those men have made impacts, positive impacts within their respective careers and within their respective fields, and no one can take that away from them, and that is all great. What I am a little bit confused on, just a little bit, and this could be, if I cast a wider net, started looking for more information on this Hero Council, maybe I would start to find more information about other members who are on this council, but I just find it a little bit odd that they talk about at such length about how there are these studies and these statistics about the suicide rates amongst veterans and first responder personnel, people who have worked in these really high stress jobs and environments. And then the two people that they present as like, hey, this is exciting, these people are involved here, is the president of a university, which, okay, the university offers some programs in like mental health adjacent fields, but that doesn't really have anything to do with Father Charles and his presidency, like, necessarily. And then the other guy is a former DEA task force member who now runs a private psychotherapy clinic called Driftwood Psychotherapy, which just kind of is giving me like, I'm getting whiffs of like the TTI industry, like where they send kids to these like schools. They always have these crazy names in the United States. There's these schools and camps where troubled teens, they call it the troubled teen industry, would be sent, and these schools and camps always have really stupid names like Green Ivy estates or something like that, like something really just kind of strange. So you've got this priest, and you've got this guy who's a former DEA agent who now has his Driftwood psychotherapy practice, and they're coming in and they're changing the game, and maybe they are. And like I said, no one can take their individual professional accomplishments away from them. I just find it a little bit strange that they didn't choose to present individuals with maybe a little bit more robust of a background in mental health. Let's not forget George Forsyth's 25 years of experience are in law enforcement, not in mental health. The two very different fields. They're just very, very different. There may be some slight overlap in certain areas, but very different fields. Why lead with and again, maybe if I cast a wider net, I would start to see like other pieces from legionariesofchrist.org talking about other members of the Hero Council who are more robustly credentialed and experienced than these two men are. Maybe, but I didn't see those. This is what, amongst a variety of other articles, got delivered to my inbox on November 7th. So this is what I saw, and I can only go off of what I am reading, which is what was published on their own website. And to me, I'm just not really loving it. I've seen them publish things in the past talking about mental health initiatives, counseling initiatives, things like that, and I've responded much more favorably because it seemed like maybe it had some teeth. I'm not really getting the same thing from this anyway, and I think that that's too bad, because as they point out in their own blurb, there's clearly such a need. And like I said, as a veteran myself, I can tell you that absolutely there is a need. But this isn't exactly giving me the light at the end of tunnel vibes that I was like hoping for, and that's too bad. All right. So this article next up is, I believe, discussing, I should say, the Republic of Croatia, which is interesting. So we're shooting across to a different part of the world. We're going to discuss some of the stuff that they have going on there. This article is really interesting, so let's read through it and we can discuss. This was published on November 10th. And it says, grab into education by establishing schools in the Republic of Croatia. Opus Dei recruits new members faithful to the cause. The author, Tamara Borek. And I'm going to switch over to the reading view. The Cards on the Table initiative, which protested against health education in schools, is funded and supported by Opus Dei, one of the associations that activistically promotes strict Christian education. National investigated how Opus Dei has also delved deeply into education by establishing a kindergarten and 2 single-sex schools. Now, longtime listeners, longtime followers of the Opus Dei fiasco are already well aware, I am sure, of how Opus Dei likes to seems. Let me put it to you this way, because I certainly shouldn't accuse or attribute feeling to an organization. I have no way of knowing, but let's suffice it to say that its members have an interesting way of showing up in education and government and economics and banking and media and entertainment, literally everywhere. And you learn, of course, if you dig into all of that, that is because perhaps we could speculate that Opus Dei is, the members are carrying out Opus Dei's founder's vision. I was the founder of the organization. This Spanish priest named Jose Maria Escriva had this vision of re-Christianizing the entire world, and that involved basically becoming a force for change throughout all strata of society. So they pop up. They pop up, particularly in education, which makes a lot of sense, like I said, if you dig into it all. So it's not particularly shocking to me, and I'm sure will not be to many people, that they are in Croatia and that they are protesting health education in schools. Not surprising to me whatsoever, especially if you happen to catch the ABC Four Corners piece on the 2 Opus Dei schools in New South Wales, Australia. Not surprised at all, because they were accused of redacting health textbooks in their schools to keep their students from learning accurate and important health, physical health, sexual health information. So let's read about what they're doing over here in this case. The Parents Initiative Carta Nastol organized a peaceful protest last Saturday in front of the Zagreb City Hall against the introduction of health education as an elective subject in Zagreb schools. The parents gathered in the initiative do not agree with the introduction of, as they say, sexual education and the LGBT ideology that it imposes in schools. This is just one of the many initiatives that in recent years in Croatia have been activistically promoting strict Christian education and the re-traditionalization of society with the strong influence of the Catholic Church, especially Opus Dei. And that's important to remember. This is not just any variety of like Christian or Catholic ethic or perspective. It's a very specific one because it's Opus Dei, and there's just a lot that kind of comes inherently with that. Some of the associations and organizations are this word that did not get translated, and I'm not going to try to pronounce it because I probably will not be able to. And the prayer workers who pray the rosary every first Saturday of the month for the spiritual renewal of the Croatian people, chastity in women's clothing, and the return of male authority and educational institutions. A kindergarten and 2 elementary schools are also open. So these are the initiatives that these people behind this protest of health education in schools, that's kind of what they're into. National investigated the reasons for the establishment of these institutions, their working methods and curriculum, and how it is possible for a parents' association to establish an educational institution that, as stated in the statutes of the aforementioned schools, relies on the Croatian Education Act, but also on canon law. It is specific to Opus Dei that its members are attributed with spiritual and ecclesiastical conservatism, and that they protect the secrecy of the institution. This secrecy was demonstrated in the case of this text because Opus Dei Croatia did not send answers to Nacional. Both schools, the 2 elementary schools, did the same. In addition to the purpose of their work, these and similar associations and organizations have something else in common. They are all strongly influenced or financed by Opus Dei, an extremely powerful organization within the Catholic Church that was founded on October 2nd, 1928, exactly 97 years ago, by the Spanish priest and Saint Jose Maria Escrivá de Balaguer. Opus Dei has approximately 95,000 members in more than 90 countries, allegedly. As it is written on their website, Opus Dei began operating in Croatia in 2003. One of the basic principles of this Catholic secular institution of consecrated life is that holiness can be achieved through everyday work. Opus Dei is known for some of its controversial practices, particularly regarding physical penance. Some members practice self-punishment using a metal belt with spikes worn around the thigh, as well as flagellation. These rituals, known as mortification of the body, serve as an expression of repentance and spiritual discipline. Although these practices have caused much controversy and disapproval, Opus Dei members believe that they help them grow spiritually and draw closer to God because they are reminiscent of the suffering of Christ. Well, that may be how they feel about it, but having talked to enough people now who have lived through the internal environment inside Opus Dei, who are required to practice these self-mortifications, my feelings are anything but positive about it, to be perfectly honest. In addition to being very influential in the Vatican, Opus Dei is also known for its great financial power, which comes from various sources. The organization owns many properties, including educational institutions and training centers, and is involved in business ventures around the world. In addition, many members are successful businessmen who contribute to the organization. Exactly 11 years ago, in 2014, Opus Dei began establishing educational institutions in Croatia. First, the first kindergarten, the Rinci Kids, was opened a year later. The second elementary school, the first in Croatia for girls only, and then another elementary school, the first in Croatia for boys only. Oh, I misread. So they started with a kindergarten, and then they went to they opened two gendered elementary school, one for boys only, one for girls only. All of these institutions were founded by RINO, the Parental Institute for Education, which is supported by Opus Dei. Single-sex schools are established, as the website states, so that boys can enroll, for example, in a drama group or girls in an IT group without fear or shame. All of this can be done in public schools, but the extremely strong role of parents in the upbringing and the education of children and the key influence of the Catholic Church on the life and education of students are emphasized here. If you had an experience going to a school that was all one, like only boys, only girls, I'm very interested in hearing your perspective of that and what that was like. I have absolutely no frame of context. I was homeschooled in my entire K through 12 experience, so I have absolutely no frame of reference for what that would be like, but I'm very interested in hearing if you have any thoughts on it. In addition to the mandatory beginning of the day with prayer, there is also a chapel, which is not unusual for religious schools. However, in these two schools, parents can also go to confession. Interesting. So it's these Opus Dei elementary schools founded by a parental institute for education, which is supported by Opus Dei. I presume, although I don't know for sure, that they have Opus Dei members on the staff, certainly Opus Dei priests, and the parents are encouraged to go to confession. No doubt they're also probably encouraged to seek advice on parental challenges. It just seems like a really, really good opportunity for Opus Dei to have a very big hand to play in a population of children growing up. So anyway, reading on, the Ministry of Science, Education, and Youth says that in the Republic of Croatia, there are 15 Catholic primary schools with 2,894 students enrolled and 12 Catholic secondary schools with a total of 2,302 students enrolled. There's only one religious primary school founded by another religious community, and it is attended by 90 students. So let me scroll through here. And it didn't all translate for me on my last reading either. Let me see. Will you translate to English? I might have to pop out a reader view. Sometimes we're trying to read in reader view, it like doesn't like translating all of it. Let's see. Now I have to find my place. Where was I? We read about the controversial practices, read about the history of Opus Dei establishing schools in Croatia, which I do think is interesting. Very, very interesting. There are other Catholic educational institutes in the country, so it's not as if Opus Dei is anomalous in its presence in an educational institute. But now we come to the crux of it. It says, in accordance with Article 26 of the Law on Education in Primary and Secondary Schools, education in schools is carried out on the basis of the national curriculum and curricula and the school curriculum, regardless of the founder of the school institution. The ministry points out and explains that sentence didn't make any sense. It fell apart. Education in schools is carried out on the basis of the national curriculum and curricula and the school curriculum. Regardless of the founder of the school institution. So all schools must follow a national set curriculum. And in regard to how this school was started anyway, because it wasn't started by any educational outfit of any sort, it was started by parents. They said that according to the law on primary and secondary education, every natural or legal person has the right to establish a school if they meet the legal requirements prescribed for institutions of this type, which includes registration as a legal entity and meeting staffing, spatial, and material criteria. So basically, if you can check all the boxes and you can get the thing up and running, there's no reason why you can't, which on its own, I don't know that I necessarily have an issue with. I don't think you should be like gatekeeping education, and if you can meet the standards and show that you're meeting the standards and following the correct curriculum, then why not? But obviously, we know that this is just a breeding ground for all kinds of potential problems, just because there's a history of that. Like I said, if you haven't seen the ABC Four Corners piece about the two schools in New South Wales, you should go and find it. You can watch it for free on YouTube. It's less than an hour long, and it's really, really good. Very eye-opening, too. It says in these schools founded by parents, in addition to the Education Act, the canonical provisions of the Code of Canon Law, the agreement between the Holy See and the Republic of Croatia, and the agreement between the government of the Republic of Croatia and the Croatian Bishops' Conference are also applied. The ministry explained how this is possible. The current provisions of the Education Act apply to the work of all Catholic schools, while the canonical provisions of the Code of Canon Law, as well as the agreements of the Republic of Croatia with the Holy See, primarily regulate the right to operate religious educational institutions and the position of the subject of religious education in schools. These agreements do not define the method of the implementing of the curriculum, which is under the jurisdiction of the ministry, but rather provide a legal basis for the opening and functioning of religious schools, including Catholic schools. Then guarantee the freedom of religious education within the legal framework of the Republic of Croatia. Sociologist of religion Annika Maranovic, a scientist emerita from the Institute for Social Research in Zagreb, explained in detail the functioning of educational institutions in which, as she says, members are recruited who will be faithful to the cause of the Opus Dei organization. Here it has a block quote, says, quote, the role of men and women as it is in the church is transferred to the family and school. Children are raised with regard to the roles that are intended for them in society. It's Annika Maranovic. So she said, many parents in Croatia enroll their children in school religious education for weak reasons, because it is a way of continuing the family customary tradition. For example, everyone goes, so let him or her go too, so that the children are not different, so that they are not discriminated against. I believe that most parents who enroll their children in Catholic schools are not light Catholics, especially those who enroll their children in same-sex schools founded by Opus Dei. Probably a fair assumption to make. These children see the world differently from kindergarten, including their relationships with other children, regardless of gender. They are firmly anchored in family practice and faith, which is strong, and the school religious context, which is reflected in their lives in various situations on a daily basis. The Ministry of Education prescribes a mandatory curriculum that applies to all schools in Croatia, i.e., the framework and the shaping of that content is provided by Opus Dei with its worldview and ideology. The curriculum should be the same and mandatory for all schools, but the values taught by public schools are not similar to those taught by schools run by Opus Dei. Do their children learn in biology that the theory of human evolution is scientifically verified, or do they teach creationism or intelligent design as a theory of the origin of man? Not to mention gender issues. There are many such examples and controversies. When we take into account the postulate of the necessity of intersubject connections in schools, which for them means connecting all subjects with a Christian worldview, it is obvious that these children get a picture of an almost alternative reality, and that is precisely why they are there, because of the alternative reality. Since no one accidentally enrolls children in same-sex schools, it is planned that they will continue their education in such a high school. They also enroll in universities or will often enroll abroad, staying in the student dormitories of the Opus Dei scattered around the world, equally differentiated in the same spirit. With the constant support of parents and family, these children, for the most part, do not actually choose their path. They are already chosen. So she's giving, I think, really good insight into how these schools, these Opus Dei affiliated schools, function within the Opus Dei ecosystem as a whole. And I think it's pretty clear what their intention, what the purpose of these schools are. It is so that by the time these children become adults, they are already well on their set path and they have already been chosen. How can the influence of the Catholic Church, in the case of these two schools, which is extremely strong and under the patronage of the Opus Dei organization, affect a student? Annika Maranovic says that the Constitution of the Republic of Croatia states that religious communities are separate from the state and uses this phrase separation of church and of state and church. This is how the Croatian education system is designed. So, like here in the United States, there's supposed to be a difference. She says the introduction of religious education as an elective subject in public schools was based on the agreement and cooperation in the field of education and culture signed between Croatia and the Holy See. This agreement is controversial in some aspects, but on the other hand, it still promotes freedom of choice. The idea of same-sex schools is relatively new in our country, and a major role in creating the climate for their establishment and the influence of the Opus Dei order is played by the so-called new wave of Catholic lay immigrants from America, Canada, and Australia. That's interesting. Together with circles of conservative Catholics from Croatia, who were active even during socialism, and especially during the early 90s, they have organized the promotion of conservative values in society. They have shown their zeal and activism in various ways through the establishment of political parties, civil society associations, the initiation of referendums and protests in situations when political decisions are made that they do not like, mainly for ideological reasons. Opus Dei is behind most of these associations. It is no secret that the same-sex schools in Zagreb were established under their patronage, and that all of the organizations mentioned are actually their branches. See also, according to some facts, for example, on the websites of the schools we are talking about, the founder of the order is quoted with special respect, and the clergy in charge of the school are Spaniards from Opus Dei. The Spanish language is also taught in the schools, etc. It is known that Opus Dei seeks membership predominantly among intellectuals, and especially among those who are about to become one, which is why it pays great attention to education, explained Annika. The influence of the Opus Dei prelature in Croatia, claims the sociologist of religion, can certainly be linked to the founding of the Civil Society Association Center for Cultural Renewal, Vigilare in the name of the family, GROZD, Hrast, and the Hadza Zivat event, the movement of male prayer workers for women's chastity, and even the Parental Institute for Education, RINO. The same sex, or differentiated as the founders call it at school, has its own context that is linked to extremely conservative biblical concepts in which, through fundamentalist references to the Bible, the roles of men and women in society are strictly distinguished. The role of men and women, as it is in the church, is transferred to the family and school. Children are raised differently with regard to the roles that are intended for them in society. These are schools formed according to the model developed in Spain in the 1950s under the influence of Jose Maria Escrivá. The reason for their establishment: greater commitment and responsibility of parents in the education of their children. The argument for their establishment is very unusual. They say girls and boys are different from each other, have different needs, learn at different paces and in different ways, as if boys and girls are not different from each other in this regard. The headmistress of one of these schools says that in their free time, boys play sports and girls learn etiquette, dance, and do handicrafts. Maybe some do. This is one of the key differences compared to public schools, which more or less try to promote gender equality. The separation of girls and boys in schools is, among other things, only the basis for recruiting later members of Opus Dei. And they do not hide it. Their members, who have families and children, promote conservative values and live them actively in everyday life, even activistly. The others, who have dedicated themselves to celibacy, live in separate spaces, men in one, women in another, and they do not meet. When the men perform important male tasks, the women tidy their rooms and cook and wash for them. From the beginning, there is a clear division between men's and women's tasks in accordance with the conservative values they propagate. And if you want to know what the most extreme end of this sort of gendered hierarchy looks like, if you want to know how that is carried out in Opus Dei, then I highly recommend the most recent interview that is over on my channel now. I sat down and talked with Anne-Marie Allen, who released a book over this past spring called Serve: My Lost Years at the Heart of Ireland's Opus Dei. And it's about the years that she spent as an Opus Dei assistant numerary in Ireland, cooking, cleaning, washing the floors, wiping the asses of the other higher class members that lived in these centers where she was required to work. And oh, by the way, she alleges having never been fairly compensated for any of the work that she did. And in fact, she's been left with a lot of trauma that she is still having to try to figure out how to deal with as an adult, as are so many former members. So it's not all sunshine and roses. You should know that. Both of the aforementioned elementary schools have the motto Ut Gigas in their coat of arms, and the sociologist of religion explained that it means like giants. The goal is to mobilize students, and both schools are continuously implementing the Be Leader program. As Annika says, this is exactly what they need in practice and in the future: giant leaders who will change the world. As for girls, they're educated in a similar spirit, but appropriate to their gender. Their good education is very important. Their role is seen in a dedicated family, but also professional life. It must be admitted that many women are tied to a relatively narrow circle around Opus Dei in Croatia and have shown this in their activist work. Zalika Markovic is only the first among equals. I'm sorry, I don't know that reference. The ultimate goal is the recatholicization, re-evangelization, and re-traditionalization of the entire society that is losing its Catholic roots. To make conservative Catholic values, especially those concerning family and sexual life, the dominant values of Croatian society. That is the mission. Not, we want to be able to live these values freely in our own lives. Not, we want to be able to raise and educate our families in line with our values. Not, we want to be able to congregate and meet with other people who in common public spaces who also feel and have similar beliefs to us. No. They intend to completely take over and convert the entire society. Every single person. Doesn't matter if you don't want it. Doesn't matter if you don't believe in it. You will embrace it. And you will embrace all of the rules and all of the doctrine and all of the dogma that comes along with it. That is what they are advocating for. Since these two schools were founded by parents, more precisely the Parental Education Institute, RINO, I'm going to keep calling it RINO, I think, as a legal entity, Annika believes that in these schools, the influence of parents and family upbringing will certainly determine, in a greater number of cases, children's perception of the world around them, including self-perception. Of course, this all says nothing about the quality of these schools and the assessments of the academic success of their students, she pointed out. So then they talk about this Rhino organization. It was founded in 2014 with the purpose of establishing Catholic schools and kindergartens. It says that it offers parents the opportunity to entrust their children to an educational institution that guarantees them a comprehensive upbringing, intellectual and professional, but also religious and moral. I'm just kind of skimming through this. It says one of the visible models of our uniqueness is the school uniform, which fosters a sense of equality, togetherness, and belonging among students, while also bringing financial relief to parents because it reduces the need for frequent purchases of everyday clothing and simplifies children's daily preparation for school. Sound off down below if you went to school and had to wear a uniform every single day. If you think that it fostered a sense of equality, togetherness, and belonging among you and your fellow classmates. Because I've heard arguments in both directions. I've heard arguments that agree with this line of thought, and I've heard arguments for why it is completely false. I'm interested in knowing what you think, and also I'd be interested in knowing if you think that being required to put on a uniform every single day from the moment you are a toddler in kindergarten on up until you graduate, if that might in some ways potentially stifle a person's like creativity, freedom of thought, freedom of expression. I don't know, something to think about. Let me know what you think. But anyway, that's pretty much it for this article. Concludes with a quote from the school about how they're trusting God's plan, because God's plan is Opus Dei's plan, of course. I thought this was a really interesting article, and I wanted to read through most of it just because I feel like it gave a really good snapshot insight into what Opus Dei is doing in regard to education, specifically in another part of the world. That's something that it can be kind of difficult to get a finger on the pulse of and take a good reading of, so I wanted to include that here. And like I said, it's linked down below along with everything else if you want to read it or share it. Moving right along. So this article, this is from the Los Angeles Press, and this is about another, I believe now suppressed or about to be suppressed perhaps, controversial Catholic movement, and this is coming out of France, I believe, and this movement organization is called Emmanuel, and I wanted to talk about this just because I thought it was interesting, something new, seemed relevant within the range of topics that I discuss here to bring it up. So this was published Monday, November 3rd by Rodolfo Soriano Nunez. The headline says, "The Problem of Catholic Movements, the Visit to Emmanuel. Rome formally announced an apostolic visit to the Emmanuel community, a Catholic group that originated in France and is known for its abusive practices." Earlier this year, Pope Francis forced the resignation of French Bishop Ray, a prominent member of the Emmanuel community. While the apostolic visit to the Emmanuel community indicates some interest in Rome to address abuse in Europe, the Paraguay and the Oblates still protect one of their priests accused of sexual abuse. October ended with the official announcement from Rome of an apostolic visit to the Emmanuel community. It is difficult to grasp the true scope of these activities. Formally, they are presented as actions that reflect communion between the Holy See and diocese, religious orders, and movements. However, when Rome announced an apostolic visitation to the so-called Emmanuel community, the French-speaking Catholic world was shaken. If carried out carefully, it should bring about significant change, but there is no apostolic visitation when things are going well in a diocese, order, or movement being visited. That's probably a fair thing to say, yes. Quite the contrary. It is only when things have been going badly for some time that Rome issues reports sending a superior of an order or a bishop, either active or retired, with broad powers to conduct the visit. Furthermore, although these visits occur within the flexible disciplinary framework of the Catholic Church, they encounter resistance. It is usually after too many letters, or nowadays emails and other forms of communication, have flooded various desks in Rome that someone suggests the need to make a visit to find out what is leading to the normally passive faithful to pressure the leaders of their church. I thought that line was interesting. It's only after there's been a flood of demand that someone in Rome suggests the need to make a visit to find out what is leading the normally passive faithful. You know what passive means? Like a doormat, flat, will not put up a fight, doesn't raise a fuss. The normally passive faithful to pressure the leaders of their church. Within the Catholic Church, at least based on my experience, there is no power to the people. Not in any true democratic sense. It's a monarchy or dictatorship, depending on how you want to look at it, or a pyramid scheme. But there's no power to the people, and as numerous cases now will demonstrate, if a person does decide that they want to demand some sort of accountability, that they require the assistance of their church leadership in some way, there is nothing to say that their cries and demands for assistance and for help will net any sort of positive result. Because the lay faithful are expected to be passive and docile, like sheep, and to follow their shepherds, even if apparently that means going right over a cliff with them. At this point, it is unclear what kind of real changes the visit will bring. This is especially true after Pope Francis' decision to suppress the Peruvian sodalitium in the final days of his life. I have an entire video about that as well, if you want to check that out. It is clear that, to date, there is no way to compare what we know about the abuses at Emmanuel with a scale of abuses reported over 25 years in the sodalitium. However, our knowledge of the abuses at Emmanuel is limited to France and other European countries, and, unfortunately, one region where this movement expanded was Africa, where it is much more difficult to obtain information about the extent of the abuses. In any case, the expectation is already there. Emmanuel needs profound change, hence Leo's decision to send the first apostolic visitation of his pontificate. Will it be as decisive as the one concerning the sodalitium? It is difficult to know. What should be clear is that both the sodalitium and Emmanuel belong to modern religious structures, which are neither an order nor an association of the faithful, but a strange combination of both. So let me scroll down through here, because this is quite a lengthy article, and I really just wanted to highlight it more so than to go into it in depth, because I've not been following developments with this organization super closely. However, if you are interested in getting a grasp on the situation and just on how Rome has been responding to situations like this in the recent past, this article is pretty comprehensive and gives a good timeline. So here, in regard to this Emmanuel organization specifically, they say, when dealing with it, it's important to keep in mind that the community itself, as well as some of its most prominent members, have been tarnished for several years by accusations of drifts or sectarian practices, financial irregularities, and accusations of abuse, both sexual and otherwise, which have resulted in trials against priests linked to this entity. However, and this is truly important, his influence on French public life is enormous. A book recently published by Goliath, one of the most important publishing houses in the French-speaking Catholic world, is titled, a French title, which could be translated as The Hidden Face of Emmanuel, an investigation into the most influential Catholic community in France, and it certainly is. The book, written by Oliver Perret, details the extent to which Emmanuel is deeply ingrained in French private life. Thousands of families share the music, art, and other cultural products that the movement skillfully uses to spread its message and gain influence, and in doing so, perhaps unwittingly, offer impunity to predators, sexual or otherwise, associated with Emmanuel. One example of Emmanuel's influence comes from its relative success Bishop Dominique Marie Jean Ray achieved in his former diocese of Toulon. I have no idea if I pronounced any of that correctly, but I like to think that I did a really good job with French there. As a prominent member of the community and as such employing many of the same cultural and symbolic resources that characterize Emmanuel, he managed to revitalize his diocese. Unfortunately, he did so by taking the risk of ordaining male priests with rather questionable pasts. Ruh-roh. In doing so, he attracted the attention of Rome, and despite his apparent success, supported by influential French newspapers such as Le Figaro, Pope Francis forced him to resign. He is the last of the 30 bishops whom the Argentine pontiff dismissed during his last 2 years as pope, as explained in the text linked after this paragraph. So I'm scrolling some more. Again, this is a very, very in-depth article. They're talking about how this apostolic visit offers an opportunity to improve the governance, financial management, and spiritual health of the community, but it is unclear how far Leo will go if, as usual, there are no real consequences for abuse and misconduct, and if sanctions, even symbolic ones, remain secret, which is a very good point. The case against Emmanuel is not based on a single case or issue, although there are at least 2 cases of sexual abuse by priests linked to Emmanuel. They're talking about authority in religious contexts, which is an important topic of discussion. And I have been seeing some stuff coming out from religious leadership in different countries talking about religious authority, spiritual abuse, guarding against these types of things and how important it is, which I do think is good because it seems like there is a growing awareness of how rampant of a problem spiritual abuse, religious abuse, and other types of abuse have been all along, which I think is good. They're talking about, look here, they mention, where was it? I just saw it. They're talking about Opus Dei's chapel. Torre Ciudad, yes. Okay. Very, 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 very in-depth article. And if I decide to do a deep dive into this Emmanuel organization, which let me know down below if that's something that you guys would be interested in seeing, then I will go into more in-depth research, obviously, about the organization and what has been happening. But I wanted to highlight just that this is happening, that there is this organization who has been accused of things that are very similar to accusations we've seen leveled against Opus Dei and the Legionaries of Christ and the Sodaliteum and all of these other organizations as well. And I think it's a good one to have on your radar. All right, moving right along. This is exciting. This is from November 5th. Zeppelin Studio and Zora Media join forces to produce a fictional series inspired by an Opus Dei made school. Lucas Jankis's production company Zeppelin Studio and Juan Pablo Pachado's production company Zora Media are joining forces to produce a fictional series about the Opus Dei Maids School. The project is based on the journalistic investigation of more than 10 years by the Argentine journalist Paula Bistagnino. Congratulations to Paula. She deserves her flowers, who is finishing writing a book on this subject and whose work revealed the testimonies and struggles of these women who, under the promise of serving God, were subjected to conditions of servitude within institutions of the religious organization. And of course, within the last year, we had the release of the El Menudo Heroic Minute docu-series by HBO Max. Now we're hearing that there's more in the works, more awareness being raised, and it's based on real research from real hard-working journalists presenting truly hard-hitting journalism, and I just think that's fantastic. Do I want to talk about this? So there's been a lot of back and forth. I'm not going to read the article, but I will mention this. There's been a ton of back and forth recently, and lots of buzz in certain religious media about the Gatzalueta case and the canonical decision that was reached after this canonical process that was carried out against a man who had been a member of Opus Dei and a teacher at this school, Gatzalueta. It was an Opus Dei school, and he was accused of sexually abusing a male student over the course of several years, very terribly. And this former teacher and Opus Dei member was convicted. He was convicted by civil criminal court, and following that conviction, there was a canonical proceeding that was carried out against him, and there's been a lot of buzz and chatter about how apparently this canonical proceeding was fraught with just like human rights violations and that sort of thing. I do think it is important for there to be fair and just judicial processes across the board. I don't really know how I feel about the Catholic Church's whole canonical thing, just because it's hard for me to feel like it carries any real authority or any real weight. You know, it's not as if they are sentencing people to prison or anything like that. They just declare people bad or not, and then excommunicate them, kick them out of their organizations, defrock them, whatever. But like, that's the extent of it, right? Like, the real justice is still, it feels to me, is still meted out in the public courts, in, you know, the criminal civil courts. So, and, you know, this individual, for all that this canonical process may or may not have been fair, is a convicted pedophile now. Does he still deserve due process and a fair trial? Of course. Of course. And so, if that is a matter of concern and truly a problem, I am sure there are people who are well educated on canon law who are going to be tackling that issue. It seems like, based on the headlines I'm reading, like this professor of ecclesiastical law is going waxing eloquent about how this Gatzalueta case violated these fundamental legal principles. People are already all over it, like white on rice. I suppose that's a very good thing. But again, I as I've mentioned in the past, I find it really strange how people are so hung up on this when we are talking about someone who is a convicted predator of children. I'm not saying I'm not saying nobody should care, but at the same time, it's like, don't we have bigger fish to fry? Aren't there worse atrocities being committed, worse things being covered up that still have not been properly dealt with, but we're going to spin out over this? All things being equal, I guess I can see it, but we don't live in an equal world in any way, shape, or form. So the outrage over the whole canonical process, it kind of misses me. But I do want to make a point to highlight and mention it, because I've touched on it over this past entire year. I feel like every single month there's been some headline about this Gatzalueta case and the kicking and screaming that people are doing over the canonical process, despite the fact that the man is a convicted pedophile, which is something that I will continue to say until the day he dies. All right, moving right along, a little bit later on into the month. This is from November 19th. Heritage's European Offensive, Exporting America's Christian Nationalist Project. This was written, published on the Global Project Against Hate and Extremism, globalextremism.org. No listed author here, but this is interesting, I think. It says, on the evening of November 14th, 2025, in Madrid, Spain, the San Pablo CEU University opened its doors to leading global anti-woman and anti-LGBTQ plus figures, including Ignacio Arzuaga, president of the Citizen Go, and Lola Velarde and Jamie Mayor Oreja, the executive and honorary directors of the Political Network for Values, for the launch of the Catholics and Public Life Congress, a GPAHE, as GPAHE was able to confirm by attending the event. So they went to this event where these people were present, and they attended an opening address delivered by Kevin Roberts, president of the American Heritage Foundation, which spearheaded the Christian Nationalist and Authoritarian Project 2025 for President Trump. Roberts' speech focused on recovering Christianity with renewed fervor and without apology. The CEU, meaning Center for University Studies in Spanish, gathering brought together far-right figures from both sides of the Atlantic, including Sophia Kubi, Director of Strategic Relations at Alliance Defending Freedom International, and Agustin Laje, an Argentinian political scientist known for his homophobic rhetoric and an ally of Argentine President Javier Milei. Kubi and Laje took part in additional panels throughout the weekend. During his visit to Spain, Kevin Roberts met with Santiago Abascal, leader of the far-right party Vox. His trip to Europe came amid growing controversy over his defense of a friendly Tucker Carlson podcast interview with Nick Fuentes, a prominent American white supremacist, anti-Semite, and misogynist. Roberts' attempt to sanitize Fuentes has triggered an internal revolt at Heritage, prompting several resignations of staff, advisors, and board members in response to his refusal to denounce Carlson's platforming of a raging anti-Semite. In his speech, Roberts made no mention of the Fuentes controversy. Of course not. It's not why he was over there. He's over there to build bridges and to spread the message of re-Christianization, to link arms overseas, as it were, I should think. Echoing his support for the Trump administration, Roberts argued in Madrid that the president, all he is doing is saving America in the West and halting the Western Hemisphere's migration. Roberts didn't mention that Trump's policies have helped criminalize Spanish speakers in the U.S. government agencies, and the U.S. government agents use speaking Spanish to justify indiscriminate immigration stops, an aspect that did not go unnoticed in a country where Spanish is the national language. And these are trends that are occurring across the world. People are becoming inspired by the things that are happening here in my country, are becoming inspired by the leaders that are emerging from this whole soup of a mess that we have. And there's definitely an effort being made to what's the word that I'm looking for? There's an effort being made to replicate. That's it. What it is. There's an effort being made to replicate the similar things that have happened here in other countries, and I'm reading articles about it like this one all of the time, and this is just another example of that. It's really interesting how all of these trends seem to be kicking off at the same time. Very interesting how all of the people who seem to be spearheading them all seem to know each other too. They all seem to know each other. All right, this is from Christian site called christianpure.com. Catholic schools in spotlight as French abuse report fuels state oversight debate. This was published on July 6th. Why did I see it for this? Did they make an update to it? Sometimes I will get articles in my inbox that are months old, but maybe they get an update or something, and then it'll get kicked over and like thrown up with my results for the month like it's a recent thing. Let me scan through it. Maybe there's something in here. So this was back in July. I didn't see it then. A French parliamentary report released on July 2nd has shed light on disturbing cases of abuse in schools, while also reigniting a long-standing national debate over the balance between state oversight and freedom of education. Let's see. I just did my Control F to see if I can find Opus Dei mentioned in here, and I don't see them. So I'm really wondering why this article got thrown in my folder. It happens sometimes, but I don't know. Anyway, there's abuse in schools, people want oversight, and there's pushback. That is kind of the TLDR of this article, I'm afraid, which unfortunately is not really surprising to me because similar things have happened here in my country as well. I mean, they wanted to make priests in Washington and Oregon mandatory reporters, which would have meant that if somebody told them something in a confessional booth about endangering or harming a child, they would have been required to report it, and that was a whole big freak out and a whole big thing. There's always pushback whenever somebody wants to make changes like that. All right, moving right along. Let's see. Are you going to translate for me? All right, here we go. Scroll down here. I need to make this a little bit bigger. So I'm not going to read this whole thing, but I think this is interesting. So this is talking about can I switch to reader view? Will it all fit? Yeah. It's talking about a new book that is being written that, according to the authors here, is just going to really be something. So this, let's see, when was this published? November 24th. This is about a new book. Yeah, it says nearly a century after its foundation by Escriva, Opus Dei returns to the center of debate thanks to its unprecedented historical research. The book Opus Dei, A History, reconstructs with rigorous documentation of previously unpublished testimonies the evolution of one of the most controversial entities in the Catholic Church. And then at some point in here, they say that this is not going to be just another like hagiography or something like that. This is going to be a very serious look at Opus Dei's history, and no excuses are going to be made for anything. But then, if you actually read down into it about who is writing this thing, kind of a different vibe comes out. So it's the work of these two historians, Gonzalez Guyon and John F. Coverdale. And it says that while much has already been written and said about Opus Dei, this volume stands out for its scholarly and documentary approach. Let's see. Yes, so it's going to be more than just a history. But then when you read down into here about who these authors are, they have an affiliation with Opus Dei. Yeah, so this Jose Luis Gonzalez Guyon is professor of history at the Pontifical University of the Holy Cross, which is the Opus Dei University, and he is a member of the Jose Maria Escriva de Balaguer Historical Institute. I'm sure he's probably an Opus Dei as well. And this John F. Coverdale is a historian and jurist that is taught at Princeton and Northwestern and has devoted extensive studies in the history of Spain and Opus Dei. So they say that this is going to be more than a hagiography and a very real historical overview, but I guess that remains to be seen. I find that hard to believe, only just because Opus Dei has a very long track record of only really publishing or approving the publishing of things that are, pretty favorable to them. So anyway, I wanted to mention that this book is coming out, and I think it's going to be, it's interesting. We'll see how it does, I guess. Let me know if you're going to be running to get your copy. So this next article that we're reading here, Barcelona's, let's see, Ultra-Catholic movements gain influence in Barcelona Archdiocese schools. This was published on the 28th of last month by Ricardo Rubio, published in Rus, Spain. Dramatic shakeup in Barcelona's education system, what awaits students and parents. Leadership has changed in schools of the Barcelona Archdiocese. A majority of this council now belongs to members of ultra-Catholic movements, raising concerns among parents and educators over possible conservative shifts. The biggest thing that I wanted to highlight in this article is just the fact that this shift has occurred. There have been people replaced, people leaving, and then new people moving in to these board positions that are making decisions for these schools, and a number of these people are tied to these conservative Catholic organizations, which in and of itself isn't necessarily a problem, except that, like we have this one here rearing its head, of course, Opus Dei, who claims to have no official ties to these schools and says that they're not interested. We know that usually is not actually the reality. Opus Dei is very interested in education and in having an active role to play in that. So that was the main thing that I wanted to highlight. It's happening in Barcelona. Stands to reason it's probably happening other places too. I mean, I feel like I've seen that play out within communities here in the United States. Just within the last few years, it's happened very rapidly. All right. We're getting down to the wire here. Last few news articles that I have. This is something that I thought was interesting, and I thought that I would mention it. This is a very very friendly Opus Dei story. It's this Opus Dei member, Sophia from Guatemala, talking about how in important decisions she has felt free and supported and able to make any decision that she wants to as a member of Opus Dei, and that, oh, by the way, she joined Opus Dei totally freely too, and she says that the work makes it easier for one to make free decisions. And this is a super short little article. I mean, the font is freaking huge. There's like very little here. It's such a light little article. But it's basically someone in Opus Dei saying, I'm allowed to make decisions in Opus Dei. See, it's really, everything's fine over here, blah, blah, blah. I just wanted to contrast this with some things that other former members have to say about free will in Opus Dei, because I think it's interesting. And I hope I hope that it is genuinely the case that this woman feels supported and free in any personal decision that she has made, and that she has felt like she's been able to make those between herself and her family and God without any kind of like overreach from anyone else. I hope that that's true. It could be. It absolutely could be. But there is another flip side to this coin. You can have a variety of experiences underneath this umbrella, and many of them can be positive, but not all of them are. And we need to address those and discuss those because they are happening in this apparently free and supportive environment, the same environment where these people are saying that they feel so free and supported. There are people coming out saying that they felt completely ostracized and locked down and controlled. So over on r/Opus Dei Exposed, I just went up to the search bar and I just typed in free will just to see what kind of posts would come up. And I saw this one. This is from a year ago. False freedom within Opus Dei. And I just thought we would read through a little bit of this post about what this person had to say about freedom in Opus Dei. And this was posted after a discussion prompted by another user. And they said that others recently made insightful comments regarding freedom within Opus Dei, but it is an important topic and deserves a separate post so others can share their thoughts and experiences. Here are a few thoughts on freedom within Opus Dei, particularly within the context of vocation. Grooming and psychological and spiritual manipulation create an intentionally engineered vocational crisis within the psyche of a young person. This crisis sometimes involves fear of hell or for not joining Opus Dei, or simply a fear of disappointing God and hurting others by not joining. Immediately upon joining, the recruit is bombarded with the initial formation, which is a very intense psychological brainwashing. This creates intense fear about losing your vocation. This has the practical effect of distancing the recruit from family, friends, and other points of contact and supportive resources. This isolates the recruit psychologically, making them completely dependent upon Opus Dei and its directors. Confusingly, the recruit, as well as all members, are constantly told that they are free. They are frequently told that they joined out of their own free will, even though they joined because of psychological and spiritual manipulation. In addition, Jose Maria Escriva and others in Opus Dei have beautiful writings that speak of Opus Dei's love of freedom. Surely an organization that speaks so frequently and lovingly about freedom must love freedom, right? Right? In addition, Opus Dei implants phobias about leaving and what will happen if you leave. It is frequently suggested that if a person leaves Opus Dei, they will have a miserable life on earth and then will spend eternity in hell. Like so many things in Opus Dei, these threats are couched in language that is just vague enough to give Opus Dei plausible deniability, but the threat message gets through. Years later, how does this play out? A 27-year-old woman is a numerary assistant in New York. She was recruited from rural Paraguay. She has minimal education and no savings. She has disowned her family for her vocation. She is miserable and wants to leave Opus Dei. The directors say, "Sure, you're free. Go ahead. Walk out the door. Good luck." How free is she, really? A 57-year-old man wants to leave Opus Dei. He has his MS in mechanical engineering, but he only practiced his profession for a couple of years before Opus Dei asked him to be a full-time director. Since then, he's been shuffled around, filling various internal roles within Opus Dei. He has no savings. His resume is a mess and makes no sense, and the directors say, "Sure, you are free. Go ahead, walk out the door. Good luck." How free is he, really? These reflections on freedom mainly concern vocation. Of course, once you see your vocation and are living within Opus Dei, so many other limitations on freedom apply. What do you think about Opus Dei's understanding of freedom? What was your experience of freedom in Opus Dei? So this post is a year old, and it has 25 comments from people talking about everything from their isolation to being forced to live this vocation. This person said, "For me, isolation early in my vocation was the tactic that they used to keep me faithful. I was forced to live off campus, told not to participate in any of the extracurriculars I wanted, discouraged from pursuing pre-med, and lived with a bunch of maladjusted middle-aged numeraries. It was horrendous. Most normal people would have run for the hills. I was so depressed, I just went with it while I allowed them to send me to therapy and have helpful medications given to me. This was my experience with freedom in Opus Dei. I was free from having any support network of any type to intervene and pull me out of what was an incredibly jacked up situation." And as you can see here, the comments keep going. People are reminiscing, people are talking, people are sharing. If you've never visited Opus Dei Exposed before, I highly recommend that you go and check it out, because it is a community of former members who are sharing their experiences, sharing their insights, sharing their memories, and they deserve to be acknowledged and heard, because for every single article like this that Opus Dei wants to publish talking about how these people feel so free and supported, there is a post on Opus Dei Exposed or Opus Libris like this with dozens of comments from people describing a very different state of affairs. So I think it's important to remember that there is that duality there. And if you are somebody who's watching this trying to understand how all of these terrible things could be true about an organization like this that has been presented to you as so good and holy and authentic, I think it's important to start to adjust yourself to the fact that it's very possible for people to have vastly different experiences, and it's very, very possible for one person to come out of an experience feeling like they benefited and gained all of these boons to their life and to their spirituality, and for another person to come out of that same environment and feel absolutely wrecked by it. There's a reason for that, and it ties into a lot of dysfunction and a lot of trauma, and we need to be having conversations and talking about that. And I know that there are a lot of people in Opus Dei who would prefer to believe that you are free to make your experience in Opus Dei anything that you want it to be. It's your world, babe. It's your oyster, and it's your world, and we're just living in it. But there are people who had a very different experience. They are still around. They're still living their lives, moving through our societies, and their experiences matter too. So while I want to highlight the fact that people are talking about positive experiences, I want to contrast that with the flip side of the coin, because it's there, regardless of whether or not you want to acknowledge it, and it's really, really important that we keep that in mind. All right, this is an interesting article. We got two left. We got this one and one more. So this was published on November 28th as well. This is from the Catholic Herald. A leaked recording of Vatican official discussing FBI probe reveals. This is a 5-minute read, no author mentioned. The Vatican is facing mounting questions after the publication of a leaked audio recording in which Monsignor Jordi Bertomeu, an official of the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith and the Vatican's commissioner overseeing the suppression of Sodalitium Christianae Vitae, acknowledges that the Holy See was aware of an ongoing FBI investigation into suspected money laundering tied to the group. The recording, released on 25 November by Info Vaticana, appeared to show Monsignor Bertomeu discussing the case with a Sodalitio representative and outlining ways to avoid scandal as the legal pressures surrounding the movement intensified. The SCV, also known as the Sodalitium of Christian Life, was, until its suppression by the Vatican, a society of apostolic life of pontifical right within the Catholic Church, which was founded in Lima, Peru by Luis Fernando Fagari on 8 December 1971. In the audio, Bertomeu acknowledges that the Holy See had interacted with U.S. authorities. Quote, "The FBI delegate was here in Lima who also wanted to know," he says, recounting in a meeting at the U.S. Embassy in the Peruvian capital. He adds that the Vatican officials were in possession of documents indicating possible irregularities. Quote, "The Vatican has already informed the U.S. authorities that the investigation has uncovered documentation that suggests money laundering." So there's quite a bit going on behind the scenes with the SCV because of some very questionable decisions that individuals responsible for the SCV's finances made in regard to where money was kept and how it was moved and what channels through which it was moved when it was. And so now there are international relations at risk. Basically, because of this, the FBI is involved, the intelligence community is involved, the Vatican is kind of caught in the crosshairs, and everybody's kind of wondering when the other shoe is going to drop, because even though the SCV was suppressed and technically no longer exists, all of its real estate and its property, its assets and everything are still very real and have to be dealt with. Plus, there is the fact that there are a whole lot of victims of this organization who, although they are pleased to have been acknowledged, are still awaiting some sort of substantial something for the effort that they have gone to raise awareness, to get their stories out, and also they deserve some sort of compensation for what was done to them. They deserve to be cared for and offered resources for what was done to them, and that's still up in the air as well. And now you have the whole FBI intelligence probe aspect of it with the money laundering of it all, which adds another fly into the ointment. And I am still working on a part 2 to my initial part 1 investigation into SCV's history and downfall. And I am going to be going into all of the like money laundering, data leak side of things quite a bit more with this organization, because it's very, very, very interesting. And I believe that we will see more developments about this whole case in the new year as well, because the story is far from over. Alrighty. Closing it out with an article published November 29th. This is written by Shay Cullen on Panay News. I believe this is a Filipino news site. The headline says, "The proliferation of child abuse in PH2. Since his election on May 8th, Pope Leo has condemned clerical child sexual abuse and called for zero tolerance. But for now, he is stymied, like his predecessor Francis was, by clerics in the Vatican bureaucracy who protect child-abusing pedophile priests." Leo voiced his condemnation in a statement read on June 20th on the occasion of the staging of a play on child abuse in Lima, Peru, where he was a missionary for 2 decades. The play was written by Peruvian investigative journalist Paola Ugaz Cruz, who exposed the Peru-based Catholic movement Sodalitium Christianae Vitae, where it was alleged that child sexual abuse was prevalent. Pope Leo thanked Cruz and others for their perseverance, quote, "even when they were ignored, discredited, or even persecuted judicially. Such is frequently the fate of journalists that expose child sexual abuse, as Cruz found out." The Pope also defended independent journalists who fight for human rights. "Wherever a journalist is silenced, the democratic soul of a nation is weakened," he said. He also called press freedom an inalienable common good, saying the moral fight for justice by victims and journalists is also the struggle of the church. "It is urgent to root out the whole church in a culture of prevention that does not tolerate any form of abuse, neither of power or authority, nor abuse of conscience, spiritual or sexual abuse." In the Philippines, many journalists have been harassed, jailed, or even killed. Reporters Without Borders has said the country had 107 journalists killed between 2003 and 2022. The Committee to Protect Journalists recorded 159 Filipino media workers killed from 1992 to 2024, and the National Union of Journalists for the Philippines reported that about 199 journalists have been killed since 1986. When people in power want to stifle and distort the truth, they go after journalists and try to discredit them with false allegations. The anniversary of the closure of the American base in Olongapo City on November 24th celebrates, in part, a media campaign against child abuse that Preda began. After exposing the widespread sexual abuse in Olongapo by local and United States Navy personnel in the 1980s that was tolerated by the local government, this writer was falsely accused of defaming the city and put on trial to be deported, but fought and won that case. Preda then started a campaign to end female and child abuse by calling for the closure and conversion of the U.S. bases that was opposed by city authorities. United Nations Children Fund research in the Philippines in 2015 indicated widespread incidences of violence and abuse against children as young as 3 years old. About 3 in 5 respondents suffered different kinds of physical and verbal abuse during childhood, mostly in their home. The research found that 22.4% of all respondents aged 13 to 24 experienced some form of sexual abuse. Among those aged 13 to 17, the figure was 17.1%. Surprisingly, more boys, 21.2%, than girls, 15.9%, said they had suffered sexual violence. The Philippines has become the global hub of online child sexual abuse, where pedophiles, mostly foreigners, pay to view live shows where children are being raped. Some of these foreigners come to the Philippines and rape children. These heinous crimes on the internet are facilitated by the children's parents and relatives in exchange for money. The telcos do not block such criminal content as if they are above the law. Artificial intelligence-powered filters would slow their internet connections, and they stand to lose money. Evidence of this is the convictions of foreign pedophiles in Europe and the US for online sexual abuse in the Philippines. The thousands of sexually abused and trafficked children suffer lifelong trauma and receive little or no help, and few ever find justice. This is all true and reflects my understanding of the statistics and data as well as just the state of affairs over in developing countries like the Philippines, Malaysia, Asia, really as a whole, Eastern Europe, and really the entire world seems to have a problem with this, but it is particularly prevalent in some of these countries where people are severely economically disadvantaged and are forced to do some really extreme stuff to try to support themselves and support their children, up to and including selling their children into literal slavery. That is something that happens, and it's not something that is even done necessarily in secret or under cover of darkness. It's something that is done because people are trying to survive. And if you want to know more about that, I actually have a playlist over on my channel that is a whole bunch of, I've titled the playlist Interesting Documentaries, variety of documentaries in there related to human rights and environmental issues. And there are a few in there that are specifically about human trafficking. And I highly recommend that you give them a watch. They're very well done. They're not graphic or anything like that. You can definitely get through them if you are an adult. I'd say if you're over the age of 16, you should be able to get through it. And they do a really good job of illustrating, showcasing exactly what we are up against in these countries where people just have nothing. They have absolutely nothing. They have no resources. They have no access to anything. They have to do what they can to survive, and people resort to some really, really intense stuff in order to do that. So while this isn't necessarily about Opus Dei or about the Catholic Church per se, obviously they do come into it, I think that it's really, really important to talk about this issue. You may notice if you follow me on social media that one of the hashtags that I use for every single post is hashtag end human trafficking, because I would like to be a part of the generation that actually ends human trafficking. We have more people enslaved today, 21st century, in our world than at any other point in human history. That is abysmal. And I would like to be a part of the generation that ends that. And so I want to highlight things like this. And truth be told, the U.S. government, specifically the U.S. military's role, the role that the U.S. military has played in enabling and even facilitating these types of human rights abuses against children and against women and against minorities, is very significant and probably would be a very good rabbit hole for me to go down, as someone who was a service member and went through the enlisted world as a woman as well. I know a little bit of something about what they're talking about, and it's definitely a rabbit hole, and it would be a good one to go down if I ever can free up the bandwidth to talk about anything else. But this is super important, so I want to highlight it. But with that said, that kind of brings me to the conclusion of the news headlines for the month, which is awesome. It's always great when I get through it, everything successfully. I'm working on paring down what I read through for these newsroom analyses. I know I had mentioned here in the past recently that I wasn't sure if I was going to be continuing to do these in the new year, but I do think that I'm going to, just because it's really helped me keep a finger on the happenings a whole lot more easily, and it's how it made me more aware of some important things that are happening around the world. I obviously can tell based on the viewership and your guys' comments and everything that you guys get something out of it as well. But I am doing my best to make sure that I stay focused and kind of pare down what I'm offering and cut through the word salad a little bit, just because I know things can get very long and rambly sometimes. And the length of the newsroom analyses is definitely something that people have mentioned in the past. So with all that said, thank you so much for sitting through this with me today. If you made it to the end, I'm very curious to hear any and all thoughts that you have about the headlines that we discussed. If you have firsthand experience or an anecdote that you would like to share, I'm definitely interested in hearing that. Go check out the other content on my playlist, and details to connect with me on social media, support my work, and all that are linked down below, along with a list of global mental health resources that I've put together. It might not be the most comprehensive in the world, but I did my best to pull some good resources. And if you or someone that you know is in need of mental health support, hopefully they will at least give you a place to get started so that you can connect with some support and resources in your region. With all that said, that's where I'm going to leave it for now. Thank you again for being here. I look forward to seeing you again soon. I'll have an interview coming out towards the end of this month, the last interview of 2025, and I'm looking forward to sharing that with all of you guys. So hopefully you will stick around for when that happens. But between now and then, I hope you all have a wonderful Christmas, a fantastic New Year's. Thank you so much for all of your support and love over the past year. It means so much. Thank you for supporting the people that I have had on as guests as well. That really means the world to me. I appreciate all of you for being here. And remember, nolite te bastardes carborundorum. Do not let the bastards drag you down.